Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It has been quite a while since we've done a Souls game ranking, so I decided I might as well rank the worst aspect across every single Souls game. And as far as the criteria or what I'm ranking, it could be anything. It could be from like a mechanic inside of the game, it could be an area, it could be a boss, it could be just like loading issues. Any single thing that brings down the game or whatever brings down the game the most is going to be in this ranking. And since we always go in order from when they were released from Demon Souls to Elden Ring, we'll be going the opposite way and we'll start off with Elden Ring Nightrain. And before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe and also let me know your opinions in the comments. And I feel like the problems for Nightrain are pretty apparent, so we'll start off with like two problems that I think are pretty bad and then the worst problem. Firstly is the reuse of enemies. No one expected there to be tons of new enemies and bosses and all enemies and bosses made from scratch and new areas and all this. But they reused like the worst enemies. They could have reused so many cool bosses throughout the Souls series, but instead they're using the Revenant and all these other fuck-ass bosses like Godskin Duo. Like, they could have used so many cool ones, so, you know, that is a little bit unfortunate. And now onto the main problem, the communication slash just, you know, like playing with the team. Like, that whole system, it fucking sucks. How are you gonna make a multiplayer game where you're as a team, but there's no fucking voice chat? There's no in-game voice chat. It's not even fucking crossplay, so I can't play with any of my friends. And on top of that, there is only trios, so you can't even play duos, and you can't even play squads, which is so weird. Why would you choose trios out of all the types of fucking team game modes? Like, squads is so much more popular and prevalent, and so is duos. And I'm not gonna lie, that is what ruined the game for me, because I only have one friend who's on Xbox, and the rest of them are on PC. And if I want to play with my friend on Xbox, I have to do a fucking co-op or a trio match with a retard teammate. And now it is on to Elden Ring, and I want to preface by saying Elden Ring is the perfect game in my opinion. I non-stop glaze this game, and I think the problems aren't like easy fixes. I think the problems just come at fault with being an open world game and just being as good and big as Elden Ring is. The first problem is build dependent. Like in Dark Souls Remastered or like Dark Souls 2, you can kind of just be good and it doesn't necessarily matter. Obviously your build does matter, but in Elden Ring your build matters so much more. Like, you need a good build. You can be crazy at the game, but if you have a shitty build, you're gonna fucking suck. And you can be horrible at the game, but if you have a great build, you're gonna thrive. But, you know, that's just kind of, you know, because there's so many different weapons, areas, and progressing systems than in the other Souls games. And along those similar lines is leveling and balancing. Sometimes you'll be way too underleveled and way too weak, and sometimes you'll be way too strong, which is not the fault of the game. Since it's an open world game and you're going to miss some areas, maybe get some cool weapons first and go to areas early, you're obviously not going to be 100% balanced. So, you know, that's not really the fault of Elden Ring, just a little bit of a nuisance. But the main problem is replayability. And I think this game probably has the worst replayability in the Souls games, although it is my favorite. And that's just because it is so much of a commitment. It is such a bigger commitment than the other games. There's so many more bosses, so many more enemies. It takes so much longer to make a build and just travel throughout the areas. And that is about it for Elden Ring, and on to Sekiro. And I don't really have any problems with Sekiro at all, even though I do love Elden Ring more and I think Elden Ring has more problems. I don't think Sekiro has really any problems. I think one thing it is lacking on the most is like the quest lines, figuring out the endings and like the lore and shit. It's just not very prevalent, especially with the quest lines. I rarely talk to enemies. NPCs, and I rarely cared for them. So, you know, that makes you feel a little bit less connected in the world and its story and its lore, but that's not a humongous deal. And I will be spending more time talking about certain games' problems than others because they have more problems and some games don't have a lot, like you just saw for Sekiro. I spent like 20 seconds describing that bitch, and I spent like 2 minutes talking about Elden Ring. And now for Dark Souls 3. Now, the main problem for Dark Souls 3, I think, is pretty obvious. If you ever watch any of my videos, I think you know what I'm going to say, and that is the areas. I don't think the areas are that good in this game, especially, like, the first couple. I think it's, right after you defeat Vort, or whatever, like, that dog boss, second boss of the game, all the way till after Fair and Keep, or just, like, right after Fair and Keep, and Deacons of the Deep. Like, those areas are all so fucking ass, bro, and that's why I don't really like replaying this game, because those areas are such a chore to get through. And I genuinely do like DS3, but those beginning areas I fucking hate, and that's why I don't play that game as often as all the other ones. And some other really minor problems are the whole look of the world. I know it's like, you know, on the brink of extinction or whatever, but I don't necessarily like the, you know, the desaturation and there's like no color to the world at all. I know that's how it's supposed to be, but considering the lore and shit, but I'm not a big fan of it. And the game can feel a little linear at times, which is a problem for most people, but I really don't mind that, especially early game, but I think it should branch out a little bit more right after the first couple areas. And now it's time for Bloodborne, and this one is going to be a short one. The heals. It is so annoying to farm for those heals, especially early game. There was no reason to do this shit, bro. It is such a tedious chore. It's just not fucking fun. And now it is time for Dark Souls 2. And the main problem with this game is everything. That's what I would say if I was a brain dead person who just watches every TikTok hating on Dark Souls 2. There's a lot of problems that people like to point out, with there being too many enemies, not being able to just run through fog walls, while being invincible and opening up doors and chests like that. But I think that's how it should be, bro. Like, you shouldn't just be able to run past every single enemy and just get a chest in a fog wall with no consequences at all. I can admit, though, sometimes when I do run past enemies and I get railed from behind, I do get mad, but I still don't mind that system. And I think there can be a winkle too much of enemies sometimes, and they can sometimes be placed in the wrong spot. But literally the only area I can think of that for is the Shrine of Amana. And even in the Shrine of Amana, where there's by far the most enemies, the hardest, and they're in the worst spots, you can still get through it pretty easily if you just pay attention and use your surroundings to your advantage. Dark Souls 2 is a game where the main difficulty comes from the areas, so people just run past the areas and expect, the hardest, difficultest parts to come from the bosses, like the other Souls games. But that's not how this game works. The challenge is through navigating the areas and what comes with it. So that's why I think people hate on the enemies, even though the enemies are supposed to be challenges. Another problem people don't like is adaptability, and I really don't like adaptability. I don't think it is as bad as everyone says it is, because you can level up super easy at the beginning of the game, and then just put like 10 or 12 stats into adapt, and you're good. Which obviously you shouldn't have to do that. It's a little bit of a kind of tedious chore, but there's a lot more tedious chores in the Souls games. Now, the main problem I have with this game, which isn't absolutely huge, but it's soul memory. I hate how all the PvP and online systems are based off fucking soul memory. That is so annoying. I get them having a little stat in the top corner to, show your soul memory, but to have systems based off it is just not cool. And now we're on to the second to last game, which is Dark Souls Remastered. And I could say what everybody else says, which is the second half. And, although I do 100% agree, because the first half of this game was on a legendary run, and to see the fall off was a little bit sad, but I still really did enjoy the second half of the game. The main thing I want to focus on is the Beta Chaos in his area. Mainly the Beta fucking Chaos and that astronomical runback. The regular runback to that guy is a solid maybe 3-4 minutes, but then there's a secret bonfire under him, which will make you have about a 2.5 minute run. But then there's another shortcut, which you have to donate like 40 fucking humanity, and it's still a 2-minute runback. And there's no need for a runback like that, especially to a boss where you're dying not out of skill, but you're just dying because it's a very luck-dependent boss. And I do like the theme of this area, but there's a lot of pointless running, a lot of enemies that just aren't fun to fight, and I think they could have done so much stuff with this area, which is kind of why I'm putting it here. And now it's time for the last, and probably the least. Nothing against Demon Souls, but these other games are absolutely fantastic. And before I get to the main problem, I'll name a couple little problems. Firstly, the inventory weight limit. Now, I'm not totally against this idea. I do really like this idea, but I don't necessarily think it fits a Demon Souls or any Souls game in general, because a Souls game, one of the main pride and joys I have in it is, exploring different areas, collecting items, collecting weapons, collecting armors, and you can't really do that with an inventory weight limit. I kind of appreciate that aspect where you have to manage your slots and manage your weight. It's kind of fun and kind of strategical, but not for a game like Demon Souls. Secondly is world tendency, and I'm not against the idea, but also how they execute and how they don't tell you shit. I don't even really know how the world tendency works, and when I was playing Demon Souls, I was so fucking confused. Dark Souls 2's hallway mechanic was way better than this. No glaze to Dark Souls 2. And finally, actually there's one more thing, which is the runbacks. I'm pretty sure this shines the most in the first area, where you have a 2-3 minute runback. But yeah, in general, the runbacks for this game are pretty unfun and pretty annoying. And the main problem with Demon Souls, I'm pretty sure you've heard this everywhere, every single problem anyone has with this game, or not really a problem, but something this game lacks that every other Souls game has, is good bosses. The bosses in this game, they're not absolutely horrible, but they're pretty bad, especially if you compare it to every single other boss across the Soul series. And that's about it for my ranking, guys. Please let me know in the comments what your thoughts, what your opinions are, just even if they counter mine. I'm just curious to know what you guys think. And yeah, thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.